Welcome to the Numbers Don't Tell Stories show. Each week, we like to give our listeners ideas on how to evaluate numbers through story. Our desire is to entertain you and provide you with useful insight. All right, well, welcome. Welcome to the Numbers Don't Tell Stories podcast. And I'm Tom Etchison, and today we have with us an incredibly special guest host. Matthew Dix isn't with us this week, but we've got a really terrific stand-in for us here. We've got Ethan Decker, who represents his company as Applied Brand Science. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but I'll give the audience a little background on how I know him. I got to meet him at a Vistage meeting, and he gave a speech, and he was really engaging. He was one of the best that we had in my time in Vistage. And he really engaged the audience and really got it. And I was drawn to him. I'm like, hey, I can't let this guy go, and I got to get to know him a little bit. And so I've been able to have several conversations with him. And this week, our numbers that we grabbed off of social media are Ethan's numbers. And so how better to build a story and talk about numbers than to have the guy who actually published the social media post. So Ethan, please welcome and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Ethan. And also, he's a lover of the color orange, which I totally endorse. So that makes him great people in my book.
Tom, can you be my introducer and hype man at everything I do?
I'd love to. This
It would be
is
great.
great.
Yeah, I've been to a couple comedy shows and they always have a hype man, a hype person who comes out and says, "You've seen them on the HBO special, blah, blah, blah. You've seen them at Comedy Works. They've played, the Ritz-Carlton, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's
My
good to
pleasure.
see you again, my friend.
Yeah.
A little bit more about me. Let's see. I actually started in musical theater and theater and improv and things like that. Fell into science, got a PhD in ecology, obviously, naturally, right? That's what happens. And then from there, fell ass backwards into market research and from there to marketing. And I spent the last 15 years doing marketing and advertising for some really big companies like Fruit of the Loom and Domino's and Nike and Duracell, and then some other small companies, which you may or may not have ever heard of, like Izzy or Brock or Hoplark. And as I wanted to know what's the connection, what's the science of marketing, what's the science of advertising and branding. A lot of people laughed at me and said, "There's no science to marketing. It's all just art and gut and instinct." And I think I get the last laugh because there is a science to it. It doesn't obviate the need for creativity. In fact, it points directly to the need for creativity. But my new thing called Applied Brand Science does what it says on the box. It helps companies apply brand science to their company so they can grow.
Yeah. No, that's great. And everything you do, and we'll link Ethan's information to the podcast notes and so on. Everything he does is really, really interesting. And I think at the end of the day, his science leads him to data, which I think is great. And that's something in numbers, something that we love on this podcast. And so I think it's fantastic to have him here. And it's rarely, we pull tweets and various other things, or X posts now that they're called, from a whole variety of places, but we never get to have the person who originated that. So this is kind of special for us. So appreciate you joining. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to bring up your post. I'll describe it a little bit, and then let's let the fun begin. So let me share this here. So this is Ethan's post, and it's something that we're calling failure is an option. And he's got a post here on LinkedIn where he's got two numbers that are omnipresent on the screen. 30,000 new CPG products launched each year, and 25,500 products die within 2 years. And Ethan, I will tell you, the reason why that I stopped on this and copied and clipped this out and put it in my podcast notes is because I immediately read it's okay to fail. In fact, you should expect failure. in the process of building something. And so I'll let you start to describe a little bit of what's behind this, if you would, and then we'll, what your thought process was and what you were hoping to get, by putting some of these audacious numbers on the screen.
I love stories. I love numbers. Obviously, I'm a data and sciencey and marketing geek. So yes, and I am also, I got to say, really excited to be sitting in for the incredible Matthew Dix, the very talented and very kind. So this is some big shoes to fill. But the place this started was from working with startup people, some people who were early stage in their companies, and a range of places in that, from people who were just dreaming about whether they should start a company to people
Right.
who had launched it last year and were figuring out whether they want to keep going and what are their chances of success, to people who are a couple years in and still wondering if they're going to
Yeah.
make it. And then also talking to some folks who are scratching their heads about some big brand things, like the recent acquisition of Poppy by Coke, Pepsi. I can't even
Yeah,
remember.
one of those, right?
One of those just bought Poppy, the soda brand, or Olipop, for a billion or 2 billion. And why is it that they had to acquire a probiotic sparkling water brand instead of making it themselves?
Right.
Another thing that had caught me was that Aha, the the Coca-Cola sparkling water brand, had recently folded. And
Yeah.
you'd think these are the biggest brands in the world. They should have all the resources in the world. They should know how to make
Right.
products that do not fail. But the numbers were pretty astounding. Yes, when I saw the fact that 30,000 new consumer packaged goods products launch each year, it seemed like a really big number. I couldn't imagine that even 30,000 fit into an individual grocery store. I have a little background in shopper marketing, so I have a
Right.
little bit more context, but that's my first step to making a story or understanding the story behind a number, is what is the context?
Right.
And fundamentally, what are you comparing it to? A number on its own doesn't mean much. 74% of men shower every day.
Right.
Is that high or low? Is that
Right.
changing? Is that going up or down? Like, you need a context. You need a place to start to compare that number to.
Right. So if
So,
you were to
yeah,
compare this, like immediately my mind goes to, well, how many products does the average house contain
right,
in order to try and understand this?
right.
And
That's
I
a great,
found that
yeah.
very difficult to find. The one number I did find was that the average home contains about 300,000 items. Now, that's
Ooh,
not CPG or anything like that, but that's 300,000 items in the average home. And
right.
even that number seems just so difficult to understand.
Yeah, I'm guessing that that number includes every piece of junk mail,
Absolutely.
every sock, every paper clip, every bobby pin.
Maybe every
So,
piece of lint, who knows?
right, right. Make sure to check your pockets before you do
That's
your
right.
laundry.
Yeah.
Um, the average home might contain in the U.S. 300,000 items. A number or range of numbers I've seen is the average American home has 300 to 500 brands in it.
Wow.
And we're looking at your all your appliances, all of your apparel, all of your food, your cleaning products, but then things like your windows, your blinds, your furniture, and then you're also looking at the services, how many different banks you use or credit cards, or how many um, different electronic services like Google. You might use Gmail and totally forget that Google is a brand that you interact with and that you
Right.
use on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So even if we're looking at total brands in a household, it could be 300 to 400 brands. And then if we're looking at consumer packaged goods, grocery store goods, so to speak, we're probably still looking at 150 to 200 different brands any given year that a household buys, whether it's soap, dishwashing cleaner, or tomato sauce.
Right. And so you spread that across the entire, US market, and you start to understand how big this CPG space is. And I think
Yep.
most people don't understand, and this number astounded me. I didn't realize how big this was in total, that CPG accounts for 10% of the US GDP,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And that's 20 over 20 million jobs and 1.1 trillion in wages in
Right.
CPG. And that's huge. Where we live here just outside of Cincinnati, it's a hotbed for CPG. And it's huge. And so what is, part of this is like, what is driving that growth, and why are they so okay with failure? Because we talk about, it's okay to fail. Well, here's an actual, representation of that right in your face.
Yeah. The scale is one thing for sure, and the scale of how much of the U.S. economy goes to consumer goods, the scale of how many brands in your home are consumer
Right.
brands. But you're right. This post in particular gets to this question of failure, of launching and of failure. Because on the one hand, it does seem astoundingly high to have 30,000 new grocery products launched every year. A lot of them you'll never see because they're launched locally. They might be launched online. They might be launched on Amazon. You might not see it because you don't go down the Asian sauce aisle of your store frequently,
Right.
if at all. Or
Yeah.
you might not see it because you just don't even notice that, let's say, Heinz launched a low salt version of their organic ketchup. I
Right.
know Heinz has organic versions. I know Heinz has a low, well, do they? Do they have low sodium? I think they have low sugar
Yeah, they
because
might. Yeah.
it became an issue. People didn't want sugar
Right.
packed into their ketchup. But maybe they have a low sodium organic version or they have a sriracha version. I don't know.
Well,
But
they will
Heinz,
now. You've given them the idea, right?
yeah, yeah. So there we go. Inception. Watch this space. No, watch your aisle in a year and a half and you'll see a Heinz low sodium organic variant
Yeah, with sriracha.
with
Yeah.
sriracha. So they might have thrown out this variant there, and most of us haven't heard of it. And 6 months later or 12 months later, no one's really buying it. So the grocery stores discontinue it. They're like, we don't like it. Take it off the shelves. Sorry, it's gone. And then along with the number of launches, which is pretty astounding, then you see the high rate of failure. That it's what did I say in the post? 85% failure rate.
Right.
That right for every Olipop, um, and Poppy probiotic soda, you've
Right.
got a Heinz Sriracha low sodium organic version that
Yeah.
didn't sell and got
Yeah.
yanked.
It failed. Yeah.
So 85% of new products fail. And what I didn't parse out in the data was how many of those are from big established companies like PepsiCo
Right.
or Procter and Gamble, and how many of them are just little startups who are trying to do Ethan's organic hemp flax milk.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing.
Well, and that I think what you're touching on there is the thing then you naturally start to think about is, okay, are these brands that I'm aware of, or is it part of this private label, process that's going on now, and or is it products for emerging markets where they're trying to
Right.
go into markets and they don't know how to reach those markets and they're
Yeah.
failing there and pulling back? Because like emerging markets is got an 11% increase year over year. Private label products are expected to grow to $2 billion by 2030 within this
Right.
entire space.
Well, and a lot of those fail. So it could be
Right.
that Safeway tried to launch a new aioli. Safe you can buy Safeway Select mayonnaise.
Right.
I'm 99% sure of that. Uh,
We're
but
testing you today.
maybe Safeway tried to launch aioli as kind of a fancy new
Right.
mayonnaise type
Mayonnaise.
thingy that's on trend, and
Right.
it didn't sell because if people want to buy aioli, maybe they only want to buy a fancy brand and don't want to buy a Safeway Select. But you're right. You can parse. Here's the way maybe to think about this, which gets at a little bit of the heart of this podcast is the numbers. One or two good numbers can raise a lot of questions.
Right.
And then where is the story in those numbers? That depends on the context for those numbers and maybe some other numbers and information that surround those numbers that help you then answer those questions,
Right.
right? Because we don't know why certain products win and certain products lose. These numbers don't answer that, but they raise that question. Are they the
And
big
maybe it
companies?
doesn't matter,
Right,
because
right.
maybe what we're after is total volume,
Yeah,
because we might be presenting to somebody who's, unconvinced, but we might introduce to them and say, hey, this buy now, pay later, this BNPL
mhm,
is 44% of Gen Z uses that now, or has used it in at least in the past year, to buy something. And so people are becoming more and more comfortable with this buy now, pay later. And that's
yeah,
up, the revenue there is up 72% year over year. So it's in companies' interest to expand the number of SKUs, because you now have the ability to generate additional revenue as you're
yeah,
introducing more product.
yeah,
And so it
maybe
kind of depends on who you're trying to tell that story to,
for sure.
that audience.
Right. So in this case, for this post where it says 30,000 new grocery products launch each year and 85% of them die in 2 years, you've got maybe three obvious uh, um, protagonists in this stories,
Well, I
right?
like
Three
that.
three story arcs. Story
Yeah.
arc one is if you run a grocery store, what's the moral of this story, or what's the lesson, or what's the arc
Right.
of the story? If you're a grocer and you realize that there are 30,000 new products each year, you have to decide which ones to list, and then you've got to decide which ones to delist because they're just not selling.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting story for a grocer to say, oh, it's normal to be putting up new brands all the time and then ditching brands all the time
Right.
as well. If you're a consumer and you're buying products, it's mostly, I think, interesting, but not necessarily very important to realize that, yeah, every time you go to Kroger, not only is it bigger because they're packing more shelves in and putting
Yeah.
more stuff on those shelves, and that's why the average Kroger has something like 40 or 50,000 products on
Wow.
the
I
shelves.
had no idea.
Yeah. At Walmart, it's even bigger. Like if you go to a big
Well, yeah.
Walmart or a super Target, it's 100,000 products on the shelves.
Right.
So they're in the business of packing in new stuff and then seeing what sells. But as a consumer, it's like, okay, it's interesting and it might help you understand why AHA, the Coca-Cola bubbly water, has come and then has gone,
Right.
or why the Heinz Sriracha low sodium has come and has gone.
Right.
And you should just anticipate that you'll see a lot of new variants and then they'll go away. And that's
Right.
interesting, but maybe not um, powerful unless you fell in love with AHA or fell in love with Sriracha ketchup.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third one, and I think this is the most important story arc here, is if you're a manufacturer and you make a
Right.
product.
Right.
You're either a big brand like Coke launching AHA, which
Right.
they were competing against what LaCroix
Yeah.
and Buble, which was PepsiCo's bubbly water. Or if you're a small company, a tiny company, and you're just trying to sell a brand new um, hand lotion,
Right.
and you want to make an all natural organic hand lotion made in the United States.
Right.
I'm just making this up. Then there's a really important moral to the story, which you hit on, Tom, which is failure is normal.
Yep.
You should anticipate it, whether you're Coke or whether you're Ethan from Boulder.
Right.
And if 85% of products fail, and that includes for the big guys, then if you go into this clenched and worried and feeling like you have to pin all your hopes on your one big, bold product launch,
Right.
then you're probably poorly informed and you're poorly set up for ultimate success.
Right.
And the ultimate success for a small company might be you have to try 10 things because only
Right.
two of them are going to make it.
Right. And what's interesting too to me within this failure narrative, right, and the change that creates for me as a consumer of these numbers. The other interesting number that sticks out to me here is that they die within 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so my guess is you put that in there for a reason. And I'm wondering, back in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, do most of these things get a 2 year runway? Is that the kind of the mean time to discover failure? And when we talk about, like in the data industry or technology, like you got to fail fast. Well,
Right.
no one really articulates that. What does that mean? Is it 2 days? Is it six
Right.
years? And
That's
here we
true.
actually have 2 years. And so expand on that a little bit, because that's got my attention.
You're right. It is the third number on the chart. There was 30,000 new launches, 25,500 failures within 2 years. So I
Right.
put the 2 years in there because, averages are great if you've got something that's like a bell curve that's distributed by a bell curve, like human height. Our height, the average human height of a human male is 5'10", and the average human height of a female is 5'8" or something. And that's great. But what's the average size of a hurricane or a rainfall event? That's really hard to measure because you've got things from massive class 5 hurricanes down to
Right.
a very light passing sprinkle.
Right.
And you've got millions and millions of light passing sprinkles. You've got thousands and thousands of nice rain showers. You've got hundreds and hundreds of major storms. And then you've got a dozen massive hurricanes that flood people and kill people. The average there is kind of a crap metric.
Right.
It's hard. It just doesn't capture the variation. And that's the same here because
Okay.
the distribution is not a bell curve. What you see is you see a lot of products die in the first 6 months
Okay.
or even the first, and then a bunch more die in the next 6 months. And that's because you put it on the shelf and no one knows it. No one knows what the
Right.
heck it is or what the heck it does. And it just languishes. And then in 6 months, the retailer's like, yeah, no one's buying this stuff. Take it off.
Right.
I want to use that shelf space better.
Yeah.
And then in the second year, you have, well, a lot of things are gone already, but from that first group, you have a bunch more that die, but not quite as many.
Right.
And then the survivors tend to have better and better odds the longer and longer you go
Got it.
until you end up with, 5 or 6 years out, the number kind of levels off.
Right.
And 7 or 8 years out, the number is leveled off to, let's say you've got a 9 or 8% survival rate to 8 years. So that time scale is uneven, and
Okay.
the odds of dying are the highest early on. And the longer you survive, the higher your odds of success.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because then, as I think about this, my mind goes to a couple of different places. And I didn't know you were going to invent a new ketchup for Heinz and all the rest of that stuff. But part of me was thinking about, okay, well, what are some of the things that have failed in the past? And like what are some of those products? And I actually found a Twitter feed on this, or an X feed on this, called Consumer Time Capsules.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I wonder, so like here's an example of one that I found from 1989, Pepsi AM. Now I don't remember Pepsi AM. I'm old enough to remember it, but I don't remember it. And I'm thinking to myself, of these brands like this, Pepsi AM, how frequently do they come back around? And so, if the Heinz Sriracha blend fails now, in a sometime in that 2 year time span, does Heinz put that on the shelf and they bring it back in 10 years or something like that? Because I found this Pepsi AM, I found
Mm-hmm.
this Aspen soda from
Well, go
Pepsi.
back to that Pepsi AM. Go
Sure.
back to that Pepsi. 1989, Paula Abdul, right?
There you go. Yeah.
Bobby Brown, Poison.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're saying it's Pepsi. Oh, the colors are terrible too. It's like yellow at the top,
Yeah.
like it's a sunrise, I guess. And
Probably.
then
Yeah.
AM is swooshed across it like the Dodgers logo. It looks
Yeah.
terrible.
Or
So
like a
a total
Nike
of
swoosh. Yeah.
25% more caffeine to start your day. Right
Right.
back when people that was one of their major caffeine delivery modes was soda. cola in particular.
Right. It was before the coffee phenomenon
Oh
that we
yeah,
had, right?
you had crappy drugstore, crappy coffee from
Yeah,
the
Sanka, whatever,
yep,
yeah,
Sanka,
Folgers, yeah,
Nestle, or not Nestle, but what just stuff from the gas station, right? Gas
yeah,
station coffee. 89, yeah, Starbucks really hadn't spread very far.
right,
And you didn't have Red Bull or other energy drinks.
right,
So, but okay, so this is a great example because it is one of those products from a really big brand that probably did great market research to find out this could have been a success, and for 100 different reasons it failed. And that would be another thing, is this one data point again raises questions.
yep,
And now I want to go find out the context for that number to tell the story, to understand the story.
right,
And it could be that the timing was off, that this could
right,
have crushed it in 1999 instead of
right,
1989. I don't know. Or maybe the design was what tanked it. Or maybe it was the distribution plan, that they launched it with great fanfare and had a great ad campaign with, I don't know who, Paula Abdul, let's put her in there. And yet it wasn't on shelves quick enough to sell. So who
yeah.
knows? But
Well, and
right, the data point creates question.
there could have been like government, regulations going on around nicotine and caffeine at the same
Yep,
time or something
yep,
in whatever it is. But it is interesting to dig into that context, and then do these products eventually come back around, and will we see
yeah,
Pepsi AM? It makes me want to go and do like a deep dive on this thread, and just follow this and see, like, what are these things, and have I seen them come back around in my lifetime? I'm sure there has to be some sort of retread rate on these things.
yeah. I do think, well, yes, there will be ideas that pop up again, and they say, "Oh, look, we tried that 10 years ago and it failed, and now it works. Damn it, we were
Right.
ahead of our time," or "Damn it, the world was against us." I do think from a branding and marketing perspective, I think we have to be careful not to say that the product failed, but that the offering failed. And
Oh,
I have this new term that I
okay.
use, I don't hear it a lot elsewhere, called the offering, which is the combo of the product, the price point, where it's sold, and the branding and
Right.
marketing of it. All of
Right.
those together, because you could say um, objectively, Pepsi AM with 25% more caffeine, or I should say, a cola with 25% more caffeine,
Right.
could have been a huge hit at that time if it was Coke, or if it was
Right.
Dr. Brown's from the Philadelphia area.
Right.
Or you could say conversely, McDonald's does not have objectively the best cheeseburger in America. It's mediocre at best. But the offering of McDonald's, the
Right.
prices, the availability and locations, the
Right.
hours, the clean bathrooms, the reliability and consistency of that mediocre cheeseburger,
Right.
that's a killer offer, which is why
Yep.
McDonald's is crushing it.
Yeah.
So the offering overall wasn't right. So if we get back to that stat from that post of mine,
Yeah.
that basically out of 30,000 consumer products,
Yeah.
85% are going to die in 2 years. The moral of this story for brand marketers and for anyone running a company, you're right, is failure should be assumed as the norm, and you
Right.
should brace for it emotionally, and you should try and hedge and prepare for it functionally as well.
Right.
And if the normal failure rate of a consumer good product is 85%, and if a failure rate of a savvy company that's more on trend might be a little lower, like 75%, that's
Right.
still three quarters. So maybe the added lesson or the added thing you're going to do from that story is hedge your bets.
Yeah.
Launch five
Well,
things and see which one works.
yeah, and it's what's kind of remarkable to me is that, and I recently talked to a good friend of mine who has been in highly, in the C-suite, most of his career, and we were talking about the failure rate within like the data industry and
Hmm.
things like that, and it's 85% failure
Right.
rate as you implement these things. And as you go into different places, and even if you draw a comparison to, SpaceX, the last X number of launches of theirs have all been failures.
Right.
And Elon has not been phased by that. That is part of the process. They've built that into their expectations and so on. And I think in talking to my friend who's sitting in the C-suite, he was like, well, that's not surprising to me.
Right.
And
Right.
so where it's disappointing to me as a practitioner in that realm, it's not necessarily surprising. Just like here, it's probably not that surprising to the people who are in, the big companies, or the, these, private label groups, or the, the new products being created by people every
Yep.
day.
Yep.
That's built into their narrative. It's jarring of us who are not in that space, and just
Yeah.
passing by this stuff. And
Yeah.
it's a good lesson to think about, especially as you're building stories and things like that, as you're trying to teach this to people, like, hey, this is part of almost every business, every
Yes.
industry, is this actually high rate of failure, and
Yes.
being able to recognize it and have a pipeline of things so that you can fill that void.
Yeah. The psychology of it is fascinating as well, which
Right.
Danny Kahneman studied and covers in one of his books. But the uh, the notion is overall, the psychology is we all think we can buck the odds.
Right.
When we're going to open a new restaurant in a location that has had 3 restaurants come and go, we think, no, 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 mine's going to be better. I'm going to buck the odds. Or if we're going to launch a new consumer packaged goods product, a new hand lotion or
Right.
dish soap or chip, snacking chip, uh, we think, no, I'm going to buck the odds. And we often have this delusion. And sometimes we need the delusion or we'd never get off the couch. The
Right.
delusion helps us to have faith and push through and try.
Right.
But you're right. I think that there's a really healthy dose of realism that should come in if you're going to go for this stuff and realize that failure is the norm and that success is the exception.
Right.
And therefore, are you ready to do that and take on that risk?
Well, and I've got one last kind of blast from the past as we start to kind of land this plane. I found this McDonald's in homage to my great co-host Matthew Dix and his time at McDonald's. If you go back to our podcast, the second episode, he tells a great story about his time at McDonald's, and the French fry grabber. And I saw this and I immediately thought of this incredible pair of Knipex pliers that I have. And I wonder if they stole this idea from here.
Wait. 1981. It's, hey kids, get a free McDonald's Land French fry grabber.
Grabber. Yeah.
It's a pink. It looks like an Inspector Gadget arm thing with all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the hinge things,
Yeah.
and
I
then
can't believe this didn't go.
it's an extenda scissors, and at the
Yeah.
end of it, are those hands, little baby
Those are
hands?
little hands. Yeah. It looked like
Oh
little
my
hand
gosh.
scoopers. Yeah.
So little baby hands at the end of this Inspector Gadget
Yeah.
extenda scissor thing.
Yeah.
And boy, that kid's hair is precious too.
Yeah, I mean, like
Um,
it is 1981. I mean, it
yeah,
is takes you back, and so I mean, anyway, so it's just
that's
these
hilarious.
are the things from the past that you never know may come back or may have inspired other things, but it's one of those things where the more we're attuned to this and observers of the world around us, whether it's the numbers or the the social media posts and things like that, the stories are just massively important in all of that. So Ethan, great having you on the podcast, man. What a great guest, and thanks for your availability on short notice, and we've really enjoyed having you here today.
So fun to be here. This is the first time I've been asked to do kind of a verbal explanation of one of my posts. It's super fun because there's context to the story. There's background to how I even decided to post that stuff or write up that chart, and really fun to talk in Matthew Dix's shoes about the stories
Yeah.
behind the numbers.
Well, you did a great job, and I hope, audience and the people who listen to this now think about, okay, well, this is the kind of stuff that Ethan brings to his client engagements. This is the level of thought and care that he brings to his interactions, and I think that's fantastic and really, really awesome. And I hope I find something else that you write interesting, and we'll have you back.
Well, let's do it again, and
I'd
maybe at some
love it.
point, maybe Matthew and I will host when you're out as well.
Well, that'll be awesome. That'll be great. That'll be even better. Then you won't have a straight man. You can just go crazy.
Super
So
fun.
anyway, take care. Thanks for hopping on with us.
Cheers.
You've reached the end of the show. We ask that if you found this useful, that you please tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you're watching us via YouTube, please like and subscribe.